The life cycle of a star is an extremely long process, like all things in space, lasting for billions upon billions of years upon end. But the cycle doesn't consist of many complex individual parts. It is actually rather brief and somewhat simple concept. It can be also easily compared with a human life. This video will explain the life cycles of a star and will include analogies and how it relates to human life and how the changes take place. To start off the life cycle of a star, a stellar nebula is first up, containing all the gases, elements, and dust to create the star. Second is the main sequence stars, consisting of the average and massive star. Our Sun is an average star. These stars are made mostly out of gases like hydrogen and helium, coming from its previous form, the stellar nebula. The nebula will collapse and form the star's core. Third is the red giants, formed when the hydrogen from the average star, with nuclear fission, turns into helium and expands into a red giant. This goes the same for a massive star, as well, which turns into a super red giant. The next part is split into two, red giants and the red supergiant. A planetary nebula is the next form for a red giant. It has only a thin shell of helium around the core, continuing to burn for a short time. This hot shell drives the star's outer layers into outer space, which they escape forever. We see this glowing shell of ejected gas, heated and ionized by the star's scorching hot core. This is a planetary nebula. The red supergiant's next form is a supernova, which consists of a massive explosion as large as 9,000 times of our Sun. This happens when the core of the Sun collapses in less than a second from its own gravitational force. Lastly, after a planetary nebula, left behind from it is a degenerate core made from carbon and oxygen. This is a white dwarf, and it is the last form for the average star line. If another white dwarf is somewhat nearby, the gravity of one white dwarf can attract matter away from its companion, becoming an asserting white dwarf. After the effects of a supernova, a neutron star, or the infamous black hole, can be formed. The neutron star is basically the core of an exploded sun, which is not large enough to become a black hole. The neutron comes from protons and electrons melting into each other. Neutrons are usually 1.4 times the size of our suns. If the massive star has enough mass, then after a supernova, the star's cores will remain along with the gravitational force with it. This is a black hole, containing enough gravitational force to even suck up light. This is a brief explanation of the life cycle of a star. In relation to the life cycle of a star to the life cycle of a human, this photo represents in a clear way how it is similar. As a fetus, it can be represented as a protostar, the very first solid form of star, can represent it, while the main sequence stars can represent infancy to young adulthood. Then a middle-aged man can be compared to the giant stars. And lastly, the white dwarf slash supernova or a black hole can be shown in old age or ultimately death. As the model shows on the left, an average star slash sun hasn't gone through its red giant phase yet, while on the right side, a red giant can be shown devouring the planets it had orbiting it. This will eventually happen to our own sun in about 5 billion years, expanding and devouring Venus, Mercury, and eventually reaching Earth. The cut-out planets can be represented as Venus and Mercury being eaten up by the stars. There are other stars further on the white dwarfs, however, with black, brown, as well as red dwarfs as well. A brown dwarf star follows the same sequence just like ordinary stars. It begins as a nebula, then a protostar, but when the protostar is not hot enough, and the star has already reached a solid state, it will become a brown dwarf. They will eventually fade away. A black dwarf is basically a white dwarf, but has burned up all its remaining fuel and shine. A red dwarf, on the other hand, is an even smaller star, smaller than the average stars, and will burn for trillions of years. They also will eventually become white dwarfs.